Admiral Yi surrender was not an option. For in his hands lay the fate of a nation, 13 ships. That was all he had left. Before him, an enemy armada of over 300. His commanders told him it was suicide. The king told him to abandon the fleet and fight on land. But he didn't. In the late 16th century, Japan, once torn by civil war, was unified under the iron fist of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. His ambition was boundless. He dreamed of conquering not just Korea, but Ming China itself. Across the sea, the Korean kingdom of Joseon had enjoyed 2 centuries of relative peace. Its army was untested, its court was consumed by political factions, and its defenses were neglected. They were unprepared for the storm that was about to break. In the southern naval district of Jeolla, there was a commander named Yi. He was not a celebrated court favorite. In fact, his rigid integrity and refusal to engage in corruption had made him powerful enemies. Twice he had been demoted due to false accusations, but he was meticulous, innovative, and utterly dedicated. While others grew complacent, he drilled his men relentlessly and prepared for a war he believed was inevitable. He knew that if Japan came, it would come by sea. In 1592, the storm hit. 160,000 battle-hardened samurai, many armed with advanced Portuguese muskets, landed in southern Korea. The Joseon defenses collapsed. The Korean army, used to fighting bandits, was no match for the disciplined Japanese. Forced as the capital fell, the king and his court fled north in shame. The entire peninsula was on the brink of complete conquest. The Japanese controlled the land, but they needed the sea to supply their vast army. But the Japanese navy would not face a conventional fleet. Admiral Yi had spent years refining a secret weapon, the Joseon, or turtle ship. It was an ironclad behemoth, an assault ship covered in hexagonal iron plates and sharp spikes to prevent boarding. It was armed with cannons on all sides, allowing it to plow into the enemy's formation and fire in every direction. At its front, a dragon's head spewed out sulfurous smoke, terrifying and confusing the enemy. It was a weapon, ahead of its time. While the Joseon army was in full retreat, Yi sailed out to meet the enemy. At the Battle of Okpo, he encountered a Japanese fleet at anchor. While his subordinates urged a cautious approach, he ordered a decisive all-out attack. Using his superior cannons and disciplined tactics, his fleet systematically destroyed the enemy vessels without losing a single one of his own. It was a stunning victory, the first real good news for Korea since the war began. A new hero had emerged. Yi understood the enemy's weakness. The Japanese army in Korea was a giant serpent, but its lifeblood was the flow of supplies and reinforcements from Japan. He knew that if he could cut off the sea lanes, the Serpent would wither and die. In a series of brilliant victories at Sachin, Dangpo, and Hansen Island, he did just that. He perfected his crane wing formation, luring the Japanese into a trap and then surrounding them with overwhelming firepower. He was systematically destroying Japan's ability to wage war. But Ye's greatest enemy was not in the Japanese fleet. It was in his own capital. His stunning success spread jealousy and fear among rival commanders and court officials. The Japanese, desperate to remove him, used a double agent to feed false intelligence to the Korean court, luring the fleet into a supposed ambush. Yi, recognizing the deception, refused the royal order to sail. His enemies seized their chance. They accused him of treason and cowardice. He was arrested, stripped of his command, and brutally tortured, nearly dying from his wounds. In his place The court appointed the arrogant and incompetent Admiral Won-gyeon, blinded by ambition. Won-gyeon fell for the Japanese trap that Yi had avoided. He led the entire Korean Navy over 200 ships into the ambush at Chiltriang Strait. The result was the single greatest disaster in Korean military history. The fleet was almost completely wiped out. All of the legendary turtle ships were lost. In a single battle, everything Yi Sun-sin had built was destroyed. The path was now open for the Japanese to resupply their armies and conquer Korea for good. In utter desperation, the king pardoned Yi Sun-sin and reinstated him as supreme naval commander. But commander of what? The navy was gone. When the king suggested he abandon the sea, he sent back one of the most famous replies in military history. "My lord, I still have 12 ships. As long as I am alive, the enemy will not dare to look down on us." He would fight. He gathered the last remnants of his fleet, 13 battered warships. He knew he couldn't fight a conventional battle. He needed a force multiplier, and he found it at Myeongnyang Strait, a narrow channel notorious for its violent, reversing tides, which could flow at over 10 knots. It was a natural death trap. He planned to use the very sea itself as his weapon, luring the massive Japanese fleet into the strait just as the tide was against them. On October 26, 1597, the Japanese fleet, confident of victory, sailed into the strait. At first, Ye's own captains, paralyzed by fear at the sight of over 130 enemy ships, held back. For a terrifying period, Ye's flagship fought alone, a single ship against a sea of enemies. He sailed directly into the Japanese vanguard, his cannons tearing through their ships, his resolve shaming his captains into action. He was reminding them how to fight. And then, just as Yi had predicted, the tide turned. The current reversed with violent force, throwing the Japanese fleet into chaos. Ships collided, oars broke, and their formations disintegrated. The narrow strait had become their coffin. At that moment, Ye's fleet charged. It was a slaughter. At the end of the day, over 30 Japanese warships were sunk, and dozens more were damaged. Yi Sun-sin had not lost a single ship. It was one of the most miraculous victories in the history of warfare. The victory at Myeongnyang shattered the Japanese will to fight. The war dragged on, but the end was near. In 1598, during the final naval engagement at the Battle of Myeongnyang, as he pursued the retreating Japanese fleet, Admiral Yi Sun-sin was struck by a single arquebus bullet. As he lay dying on the deck of his flagship, his last words were not of his own pain, but of the battle. "The fight is at its peak," he commanded. "Do not announce my death." His nephew wore his armor and continued, beating the war drum, and his men, believing their admiral still led them, fought on to a crushing victory. Yi Sun-sin saved his nation. His victories ensured Korea's survival and independence. He died without ever knowing the final outcome of the war, but his sacrifice ensured it would end in Korea's favor. Today, he is revered not just as a commander, but as the embodiment of the Korean spirit, resilient, brilliant, and unbreakable. His battle reports are still studied in naval academies across the globe. He was a man who faced betrayal from his own country and impossible odds from his enemies, and defeated them both. He is, and always will be, Korea's immortal admiral.